It's time. Welcome to the For My Dawgs podcast, where we help men become the best version of themselves and highlight that we can't do it alone. My name's Tucker. I'm here with my co-host, Johnny. Our commitment to you is to make this a space for fun, honesty, vulnerability, and community. We have a great episode for you today. It's part 2 of our Mailbag episode. So thankful for all our listeners who sent in questions. In this one, we cover specifics of the gospel, the good news of Jesus. We talk about the importance of vulnerability, how it sometimes is hard to be vulnerable as a man, but how it's actually a true strength to do so. And we even get into how are we fighting the male loneliness epidemic, and what are some ways men can connect, build friendships. Buckle in. It's another long one. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Johnny. Part 2 of the Mailbag episode.
Our first part 2.
Yeah, we've never done a 2-part topic or theme. So
They say sequels are worse sometimes. So hopefully this is not the case.
Well, speaking of cinema and sequels, our first question for part 2 of the Mailbag episode is, what are the top 3 TV shows of all time? And Johnny, you got to share with the people the exchange we had for this question, because we had a shared note where we kept all these questions. So you can explain to our audience.
Now, I'm not trying to sound like very trendy by calling him out for this. It's just because I'm a middle school teacher. But the question was phrased top 3 TV shows, OAT, O-A-T. And then I saw Tucker deleted it and put out. And he was like, I think you misspelled that word. And I was like, no, I think you just don't know that O-A-T means of all time. Kind of like goat, but without the G. And so just how to educate Tucker, you know?
Yeah. See, I knew goat, but I didn't know they took the G out of it and just did oat. Yeah. So, but now I know.
Oat.
So for mine, I'm going to go number 1. What?
I mean, I know it's going to be. It's a very easy.
Yeah, I do make it pretty easy. Number 1, Ted Lasso. I mean, come on. Great show. Learned a lot from it. Love it. Very joyful show to watch. Number 2, Breaking Bad. Now, I haven't watched it in a long time. It's been a minute since I've watched it, but that was a phenomenal show. And then number 3, sorry, go ahead.
Never watched it. Sorry.
You're missing out. How about I watch Rudy, you watch Breaking Bad? Although Breaking Bad is going to take you a lot longer than Rudy.
That's a different kind of exchange.
Number 3 for me, and this may be more of a surprise because I don't feel like people think about this as a TV show, but The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls documentary, is like so good. I will rewatch it. I mean, I've seen it more than once, so I would put that up there. And then I have some honorable mentions.
It was hard to do
because
3.
It's hard to just pick 3.
Yeah.
So my honorable mentions are in no particular order: How I Met Your Mother, even though the ending stinks; Peaky Blinders, and there's a show called Turn, Washington Spies that you would probably love.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it wasn't very popular. It was like on AMC, but it was a really good show. So those are my honorable mentions.
Nice. Mine are, and it's my ringtone on my phone. It's been the ringtone on my phone forever. It is That 70s Show. It's my all-time number 1 favorite show. Have you watched it before?
A few episodes. I was never that big of a fan.
It's a great show. Then I would say 2 would be The Office. All there's 2 different types of people in this world. It's The Office and Parks and Rec.
I'm a Parks and Rec guy.
Yeah, I know. See, I'm an Office guy. So I've watched a few, and Parks and Rec is funny, but I think Office is superior. It's my opinion. And then 3, I would say, would be Ted Lasso for sure.
Nice.
And man, it's just a phenomenal. I don't know when season 4 is coming. Hopefully it's getting out here soon. Then I would say if I had to do 4 and 5, I would say like the first few seasons of Yellowstone, like the beginning of it, because it just faded out at the end, and I did not like it at the end.
And that's the reason it didn't make my list.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, the beginning of Yellowstone, and then I'm going again with Kevin Costner. This is an old show. It was the Hatfields and McCoys. If you know that show, shout out to you. It's an old show. It's with Kevin Costner. It's a cowboy show, and I think there's 3 or 4 episodes. Phenomenal show. So Hatfields and McCoys was
I think I remember when that came out. Wasn't it on the History Channel?
Yes. Oh, I think it was back in the day of cable, because Tucker and I were born in the 1900s, so we were. That's not wrong. So we had back in the day of cable.
Yeah.
Now, so that was a question from Will.
Yeah.
We've got to say his name.
Thank you, Will.
Yes, thank you, Will, and thank you for educating us on what oat means, Will. This next question is super cool. This comes from my buddy Josh Laddie. This comes from his students. He's a teacher also in the good old state of Oklahoma, and
he's an Okie.
Yeah, this comes from his students, and they said, "Are there more wheels or doors in the world?"
And I've put some thought into this.
Me too. So let's see what our answers are.
And at first, I was like, okay, well, not everywhere is technologically advanced enough to have cars. So at first, I was like, there's got to be more doors. However, I went back on it because in those places where it's not as civilized, they may have doorways, but who knows if there's a door. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And with cars or bikes or wagons or whatever, there's usually more than one wheel on any given form of transportation. Then you have trucks that have 18 wheels and even more than that. So I got to go with there's more wheels than doors.
So I am going with there's more doors than wheels because there's more buildings than cars, I'm assuming.
You sure about that?
In the world. And I also cheated.
Did you look it up?
I looked it up. And
there's no way there's a definitive answer.
It does. It says, and what
did you ask ChatGPT?
I did Google, and it has an AI overview. And it says, according to most estimations, there are likely.
Yeah, it just says
more doors than wheels. Then, if you go to Reddit, it says there's more doors than wheels. Then, if you go to, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more articles, it says there's more doors than wheels. So,
but still, it just says likely, so I could still be right.
You could be, but you likely could be wrong.
Yep. I reserve the right to be wrong.
That's true. And now, this next question is a lot more entertaining than I thought it would be.
For sure. This one's a good one.
This comes from Mr. Cooper Tilley, and he says, who would win in a fight, a gorilla or a bear?
So we were talking about this weekend, and I think just because of the sheer size, speed, and I'm going to say an addition of what I would consider a weapon, I got to go with grizzly bear. Because they can weigh up to 700-800 pounds, I think. They can run 35 miles an hour or something crazy like that. I forget what the specifications are with that. But they also are massive if they stand on their hind legs. And they have claws and really sharp teeth, right? So I think now if a gorilla dropped in off a tree and did a surprise attack, that would be a different story. But just you put the two facing off kind of in boxing match style fight, I'm going grizzly bear 10 times out of 10.
No, me too. I think a grizzly bear would win. I think that would be the closest fight that you would have. And I think somebody has to make a movie out of that because that would be an amazing fight. I think
What do
that
you mean
the gorilla, it's fast, but I did look this up too. So I know I cheated in all of these. But I didn't look up who would win. I did not do that. I just looked up speed, and like it says that like a gorilla can only run up to like 20 something miles per hour, whereas a bear can do 35. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. But that's the one article that I read. So like it'd be faster, and you're right. It could stand up, and let's say a gorilla could put a bear in a chokehold. Probably that bear could just WWE and just like drop it back, and crush it. And so, like, you're right. If it came out of there, jumped off from a tree, but I'm not a biologist. That's with animals, right? I don't study animals. Biologist I'm a social studies teacher, so we're not even going to get into
maybe
that.
a zoologist?
Zoologist, but I don't think that they're in the same like habitat, right?
What do you mean?
Like gorillas and bears don't live in the same habitat. Like they don't live in the
I don't think
same.
so.
So, because I think God knows that if they put them two together, that the bear would crush them.
Yeah.
So I
That's
think I
fair
made
enough.
myself sound really dumb in that argument, but I do think that the Bears would win.
Yeah.
The Bears.
Not the Chicago Bears, but
Yeah,
just
the
Grizzly
Bears.
in general. Yeah. So the next one is from your buddy Nathan. Again, we got one of his on the last show. He asked what it would take for us to run a full marathon. Let me just go ahead, Nathan. You'd have to pay me like $1 million for me to run a marathon.
How long is a marathon?
It's like 23.6 miles, I think.
No. Okay. He does not say in this thing to complete it. Let's just clarify.
You make a good point.
He does not say to complete it. All right. So if you know me, I like to play word games. So
yes, you do.
He did not say complete it. So I would run a full marathon. I would not complete it. The one way that you would convince me to train for this, like fully, Nathan Haddon, is if you moved here. If you moved up here, all right, here's my deal. If you move up here and you live close by me, I would train with you to run a full marathon.
I like the offer, Nathan.
I'm not saying that I will win. I'm definitely not going to beat you. All right. You're going to beat me because you've done this already. And you're training for one currently. But if I run a full marathon and you come up here, you have to also build us a studio. So I have two parts. Either move up here, build a studio for us, and then Tucker and I will both run it.
We got to get something out of that self-torture.
Yes. So you move here, build us a studio. We'll run a half marathon and pass out after the first mile.
Yeah, and tying it back into the first question, one of the funniest How I Met Your Mother episodes is when Barney decides to run the New York City Marathon without any training, and he finishes it, but then he gets on the subway and his legs like quit functioning. So he's in a seat, and then like a grandma with a walker comes up, and he's just like, I'm sorry, I can't stand up. And everybody thinks he's a jerk and rude. And then like a pregnant woman comes up and he still can't get up. It's a funny scene and a funny episode.
I need to watch this show. I've heard good things about it.
Oh yeah, you got to make that like you and Claire's like going to bed show. That's how I introduced Haley to it.
Yeah. We're watching Lioness right now. That's our show.
Gotcha.
It's a little graphic, I will admit, but we are watching that. But this last one is from Evan. Again, Evan from your church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he gave us a very vague question. He said, just say any top 5 rankings. And you can't give us that kind of a vague answer. Like Tucker and I were sitting there yesterday. We're like, what in the world do we like? Don't do that. You got to be very specific with us. So Tucker, tell them what our ranking that we landed on.
Yeah, so this is with the help of ChatGPT. We landed on a top 5 of guy moves that make you feel like you're a man, even if they're barely impressive. I'll start.
Are yours in order or yours is in just 5?
I'm just going to throw them out because I'm really coming up with these off the top of my head. So I haven't thought through enough to actually.
Way to prepare for our audience.
Yep. You're welcome, Evan. So, first one I'm going to throw out is just perfectly cooking a steak. That's going to be one for me.
That's good. And you can cook a good steak. Mine would be grilling. That was my first one. Was like just like grilling. You know, I got a grill on my back porch and just sitting out there grilling, listening to music. That just like you can just feel like a man doing that.
Mm-hmm. Another one I just thought of would be being the guy that tends the fire at a get together, even if it's not your house. You just step up. You assume the responsibility of keeping that fire going no matter what. And you're like, man, that's what being a man is.
And I'll echo that is, let's say you're at that fire, and just being a man is if you're listening to this man right here, Johnny Cash, or also, let's say Hank Williams Jr. I mean, those are two different categories, but just listening to some like real good old country music makes you feel like a man.
I would say doing anything. Well, let me get more specific. I recently entered into this era, this won't apply to you, Johnny, so this is just specific to me. But playing basketball, just leaning into being a guy who just rebounds, plays good defense, and hits some occasional shots in the post, just like good, gritty, old man basketball, that makes me feel like a man.
Nice. I would say, and now I'm halfway there on this one. I'm not fully there, but I used to drive a Hyundai Sonata, and that did not feel like a man driving that. Not saying you can't be, but just me, I did not. Now I drive a 4Runner, and that's getting there. But to me, driving a truck makes me feel like a man. Like if I like one time Tucker and I were like moving or something, and I drove your truck, and I was like, man, I just feel like a man. I'm driving a truck right now. So that's to me, driving a truck automatically makes you feel like a man.
I'm gonna throw in smoking a cigar.
Ooh, that's good.
I feel pretty manly doing that.
Yeah. My sister though also smokes them, and she's pretty much a woman.
Yeah,
but
it's not like you got to be a man, but it makes me feel manly.
I'm just giving you a hard time. Yeah, I would say, let's see, what is that? Are we at 4 or?
I think we just did 4.
Okay,
so one more each.
So this one is the sidewalk rule. You know what this means?
Yep, I know exactly what you're about to say.
My dad taught myself and my sisters this, is that when you're walking on a sidewalk, that you make sure that as a male, you are the one closest to the street, and your girlfriend or your wife or your sister or your mom are the one away. So you are in between the girl and the street. So it makes you feel like a man.
Mm-hmm. My last one, and I may have saved the best for last.
Okay.
Having a mustache.
See, I can't.
Makes me feel like such a. You have one right now. If you shave the rest, it would look great.
I'm a middle school teacher. You want to get humbled? You know, shave to a mustache and get 6th graders making fun of you. I'm not doing that.
I don't live in that world, so I can wear one proudly.
True. Having a mustache does. Having just like a good beard or mustache, you're right.
Yeah, just good facial hair in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very manly.
All right. Well, let's switch gears, Johnny. Let's slow it down, you know? Let's get a little deeper.
Put on some Johnny Cash in the background.
Yep. So this is kind of picking back up a little bit where we left off with these types of questions in the last episode. But another one that came through was, when it comes to the gospel, is it possible to miss the forest for the trees? And again, with these types of questions, we're not going to say who asked it, just because we want to keep it anonymous for their sake, just in case, any of them are about sensitive topics. But when it comes to this question, Johnny, what do you think? Is it possible to miss the forest for the trees when it comes to the gospel?
Well, you and I talked about this before, and so I'm not trying to put a reverse Uno card on you, but I am. If you could, because I think if you explain your reason first, then my reason will make more sense.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so you answered that real quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I would say yes, that is possible to miss the forest through the trees. And I think what the question means is it possible for someone to focus so much on one aspect of the good news of Jesus that they miss the full picture of the good news of Jesus? And I would say absolutely yes. We see it happen all the time. Whereas if you focus, I think the best example of this is if you actually look what Jesus says the good news is. Mark 1's a great place to go. When he says he came about preaching and repent and believe the good news, when in that sentence, he says, for the kingdom of God is at hand. So when Jesus talks about the good news, primarily it's about the kingdom of God coming to earth, and which is setting up that he is the king reigning over the universe. However, for a lot of American evangelical culture in the last, I don't know, it's been a while, the gospel has somewhat been condensed to, in some cases, not all cases, has been condensed to where are you going to go when you die, which is not at all the gospel that Jesus preached. So to answer the question, yes, you can miss the forest through the trees. Is spending eternity with Jesus in heaven part of the good news? Yes. But it's a reward or benefit of the good news. It is not the good news itself, if that makes sense. So when you're looking at the gospel or the good news, or you're talking about it with people, let's try and stay as close to what Jesus said the good news was as we can. Now, obviously, Paul wrote a lot of letters talking about the gospel, and the New Testament, expands and explains and translates, a lot of it. And so we got to take that into account too, but try and see the full picture of the good news. There's a lot to it because it is truly good news. There's a lot of good in it. And so we need to look at the full picture. If we only focus on God, putting Jesus on the cross as a punishment for sin and, pouring out his wrath on Jesus, then we're missing the fact that God loved us enough to put himself in the situation to take the punishment on himself and on his own son. And so, there's a balance to that, but don't get so focused in on one aspect of the good news or the gospel that you miss the rest. I think that's what this question's getting at. So
And
I know
that's
you want to add something to it.
and that's kind of where that's why I wanted to go after you, because I do think like there's a balance of that, because the trees, like the question, we'll say it again, is it possible to miss the forest for the trees, referring to the gospel? The trees make up the forest, though, and so there are details in the gospel that you don't need to overlook. Now, not everyone's a hill to die on, but there are important things, and so like Tucker said, there's a balance. Is if you focus so much on the love that God gives, and he does give love, and that is 100% true, you may miss the judgment of it and think that you can just live this like crazy life, But if you focus so much on the judgment of Christ, then and yes, he does, like, and there are things that, like, as a Christian, that we have to abstain from. If you focus so much on this and are so rigid with that, then you might miss the love of Christ that he offers. And so it's not a or, it's a both on that side. And so this is a really tricky question because it's not this just like one word answer. You have to be very careful with how you answer this because, it says like, living a Christian life is walking on the narrow path. And you have to be careful not to go too far on one side or the other, and let's just and stick to the course. So that's a great question from our listener, and I hope I did that justice, and I hope I kind of wrapped up what you were saying as well.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing to it, and this will kind of go back to, we talked about this in the last episode, but what you believe about, and there's neuroscience that backs this up, what you believe about God and what you believe about the gospel actually shapes who you are. And so if you only focus on God being an authoritarian God and his judgment and anger, what that actually does is it stimulates a part of your brain that stirs up anger and fear and anxiety in you, and that's going to dictate who you are as a person. And it's going to make you less empathetic and less compassionate towards other people if that's all you focus on. And then on the flip side, if you focus more on God's love and his compassion and his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness, that's going to stimulate your frontal lobe and your interior cingulate in your brain, which is actually what unlocks your ability to show love, to show compassion, to have empathy towards other people. And so it's really fascinating, but what we focus on when it comes to God actually does impact who we become as a person. And I think the best place to go if you're thinking about who God is and what we should think about God based on the good news is Exodus 34, I think it's 6-8. God comes before Moses, and this is God's first time describing himself in his own words. And this passage is the most quoted and repeated passage in the Bible by the biblical authors. So not that we quote it the most, but like the other writers of the Bible pick up this verse and repeat it and quote it again. And in it, God says his name first and foremost, which carries meaning with it. But he says that I'm a gracious, compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin to, I'm going to stumble on the words, and then at the end, and this is why I think it's so important, at the end it says, but he does not let the guilty go unpunished, and he will bring judgment on the parents and their children to the third and fourth generation. Now, so that has two parts, right? The very beginning of it, it's all focused on God's love, compassion, grace, mercy, forgiveness, all those things, which is good. And we need to focus and pay attention to those because it's going to make us more like Jesus. But that piece at the end, what that is it's an assurance that God will not leave evil in this world. He's going to deal with it eventually, and he's going to make things right. And so part of the way he does that is by bringing judgment. And what his judgment looks like is ridding the world of evil. And so I just think that's the best place to go for the balance that we're talking about, Johnny, is that passage in particular. And there's a book called God Has a Name by John Mark Comer. If you're interested in diving more into that scripture specifically, I would highly, highly recommend it. So it's a long answer, but that was, like you said, a very difficult question. So kind of tagging off of that, the next question is asking, what does forgiveness really mean? And we just talked about forgiveness a little bit. So Johnny, what would your take on that be?
Yeah, so to this listener also is thanks for these easy questions, because this one I feel like this one you cannot just like say one thing for one person. I think this means different for every single person. And because like for my dad, for instance, is he forgave his father, but just because he forgave his father didn't mean he wanted to ever see him again. And so like I heard a quote one time that says that grace has a backbone, and so just because you forgive someone does not mean that you have to like also like, just accept everything as well if you have this like hard circumstance. So I say that like because I know people have gone through a lot, but like let's say it's with your friend, okay, and sometimes it's like there's forgiveness of your friend, and you have to like really like take into it and think, okay, Christ forgave you for all your sins, and what your sins did put him on the cross. And so like let's take that into our friendship. Like let's try to forgive our friends, to be loving towards them as well. Or you also could talk about this. Like I think there's 3 categories, a really tough issue, your friends, or also yourself, because you need to talk about how to forgive yourself. And forgiving yourself about some things, I think that talks about is like walking in repentance and not shame, because like Christ has forgiven you. So after you've forgiven yourself, don't just sit there and shame, because that's the enemy. Like that's the work of the enemy is just like putting that weight of shame on you to where you feel like you can't forgive yourself. Walk in repentance after that. And so this one, I think, is in 3 categories. Every person is going to be different, and so it's going to be really hard to to answer this for one particular person, but I don't know if you agree with me. There's kind of like, there's a hard one with let's say you went through something heavy. You can forgive them, but that doesn't mean you have to see them or accept them anymore. With your friends, show the love of Christ, and then with yourself, walk in repentance and not shame.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that, forgiveness only requires one person. Reconciliation, on the other hand, requires both parties.
That's good.
And
But that's different.
Yeah. And I would say, to your point, if you're both Christian in whatever the conflict is, you have that common ground of faith in Christ. And so the hope would be that you could reconcile with someone who also follows Jesus, that you could come to a place where there is forgiveness and also reconciliation. However, there's tons of situations out there where you're dealing with people who are just completely selfish, what some would consider like narcissistic personalities, and they just are never going to admit fault or wrong. They're always going to defend why they did what they did. They're going to continue to hurt you over and over again unless, God gets a hold of them and changes their heart. Now, in those situations, you can forgive that person and you can experience healing. But it doesn't mean that you got to go make things right with them, because
Right.
if they're not willing to change or to admit fault or to quit hurting you, then it's not like forgiveness means you got to just forgive and forget, as some people say. No, forgiveness is for you. It's for you to heal and break the chains and the hold that person has on you, no matter how, traumatic what they did to you is. Forgiveness is part of the healing process for you, and they don't have to be involved in that. If they're not showing signs of repentance, then reconciliation probably isn't going to be possible. So yeah, that would be, what I would say about it. And I think you see that even played out in secular culture too. There's all these mindfulness and meditation practices where they tell you to to think about the person that you're trying to forgive, and you imagine telling them that you forgive them. And people describe having these experiences where that was just a freeing and healing thing, even though they never said that they forgave that person to their face, because maybe it was someone who hurt them way back in their past who isn't even in their life anymore, but to this point had still had an impact and was still hurting them to that day, even though they weren't in their life. People have found that doing these meditation practices of imagining forgiving the person can be a healing practice. So I think that just goes to show that forgiveness is more about you healing and moving on from, whatever it is than it is for the other person.
Yeah. No,
So yeah.
that's good. Yeah. Just to recap, it's different for every person and every kind of
Uh-huh.
situation. And for this next question, I like this question because the person who submitted this had no idea that Tucker and I and our buddy Cole, we went and got some bourbon and cigars and we're just talking, and I brought this question up, and then we asked people to bring in questions, and someone else brought this question up. And so it's a really good question to reflect on. But it is, what do you wish you could tell your younger self? If you go back into a time machine and wake up your younger self, what would you tell them?
I'm trying to remember what I said when me and Cole were hanging out.
I know what I said if you want me to go ahead and answer.
Yeah, you go ahead and I'll try and remember.
I'm going back to more about in high school, and I would have said, stop caring about other people's opinions and live your life to your potential. Don't go around and wondering and caring about other people. I'm not saying be a jerk to where you're mean to people. I'm saying don't be so insecure in that aspect to where you are consumed with how people think about you. Because 9 times out of 10, they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about their own selves as well. And so that's a lesson that I learned after high school that I wish I would have learned during high school.
Yeah, and I don't think the one I'm about to say is what I said when we were hanging out, but I like this answer better. So I would go back and tell myself, the man that you're going to be when you're 70 is determined by the actions you put into practice now and the decisions you make now. And what I mean by that is not that like who you're going to be at 70 is set when you're like, a teenager. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if I could go back and tell myself that, because I mentioned in the last episode that like I wasn't finding joy and satisfaction in Jesus. I wasn't truly following him. I was chasing all these other things for that. If I could go back and tell myself just that one simple line, it would be like, hey, if you're claiming to follow Jesus, so if you want to be like him, that starts right now. That's not something you do when you become an adult. Like you can do that right now and start becoming more like Jesus right now. You can start becoming the best version of yourself right now. I think I would have put a lot more effort and would have been more intentional in my time playing sports, which is a big regret of mine. I just feel like I was very lazy and didn't put as much into it as I could have. And so if I could just tell myself that, I wonder, where I'd be at today if I just would have had a different mindset at that time in my life.
But to also, counter that is, if you watch Back to the Future, if you do talk to yourself, you mess with the future. And
Butterfly effect.
And so, yes, do I have regrets in my past? 100%. However, it's led me to this life right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everything happened for a reason.
Yeah. Which I'm actually going to jump ahead to another question because it's related to this.
Go for it.
Because I think you're onto the right thing there.
What question? We're going out of order now, and now I'm going to be all confused.
How do you process failure, and what advice would you give to someone who ties their self-worth to success? So, with what you just said, I feel like one thing that's helped me process failure so much in my life is that Romans 8:28, Paul says that, and for those who love God, God works all things for their good. And there's more to that passage than that, but I've always just thought of that as like, no matter how many times I mess up and fall short, God will bring some form of good out of it. And that's what we see even in his death and resurrection, like in something as horrible as God's own son being crucified in this just insane form of torture and to the point of death. Out of that comes the resurrection and the potential for all of us to experience new life. So the story of Jesus gives us hope that from death, from things that are bad and evil, comes life and things that are good and full of light and love. And so I've translated that, into my own life to your point, yes, I have regrets, growing up and decisions I made, but I also know that that's made me the man I am today. And it's shaped me and formed me because God has taken those mistakes I made and those failures and he's used them for good. The amount of times that I'm able to help young guys now who are going through the same things I was going through back then, and I'm able to kind of help them see it at a younger age just because I went through it too, is incredible. So God will take those things that happen for evil or for bad, and he can use them for good. And, I think we've mentioned this before, but one of my favorite Matthew McConaughey quotes, he was giving a speech and he said, if there's one thing I would want to go back and do, I would want to fail more, because you actually learn more from failure than you do from success. So for someone who really prioritizes success or ties their self-worth to success, I would say your success is dependent on failure. So learn to see failure as a friend and not necessarily an enemy.
Yeah.
Or a teacher, maybe. See it as a teacher.
Well, that's what, after every quiz and every test that I give to my students, before we move on to something else, I say, listen, don't share your scores. Keep that to yourself. But if you did good on that, great. Now you know how to do good for the next one. Continue that practice. If you did bad on this quiz or test, great. Now you know what you need to fix for the next one. And I say that every time. That's a quote from like Jocko. If you ever just go on YouTube and type Jocko's good speech, because he says everything is good. You can grow from everything. Whether you had a good moment or bad moment, it's good because you can grow from it. And so it's a lot easier said than done, because when you're in that failure, you're not thinking that, but take that now so that when that does happen, you're ready.
Yeah. And I've been watching, speaking of Jocko, who was military special forces, I've been watching this new reality show called Special Forces, and it has like Cam Newton and Golden Tate and like Olympic athletes and some celebrities. And they signed up to do this show, and they put them through like these series of special forces training. And, throughout the show, people quit, and some are like medically disqualified, and because what they're putting them through is crazy. But it's so interesting to watch these people. Like, the NFL players are the one that blow my mind the most. Like, they competed at the highest level in what's considered to be one of the toughest sports out there. And to see how they deal with failure is just so, like, such an interesting picture into who we are as humans. Because these are guys that you would think they've lost games before. They know what it's like to lose and to learn from it, but they get in this different environment, and it can you see it stack up. Like, if they fail multiple tasks in a row, it like some of them it carries with them. It's really interesting. So I recommend that show if you haven't watched it yet.
Yes. He told me about it. I need to watch it. Going back to our next question is, I really like this question because our small group asked us this question at the beginning of this year. And it is, what would you title your current phase/chapter in your life? And I don't know if you have one, but for me, so our small group does this at our church, and I love it a lot. And they say, what is your word of the year? And then so like this time they told us, hey, your word was this. Did you do it? And so Claire and I, our word is consistent this year. And knock on wood, right now we're doing really good because we said that we wanted to be consistent with our physical, mental, and spiritual health. And right now, Claire and I are doing a really good job of that. We're reading the word every day. We're actually in our small group. We're going to read through the New Testament in a year. And we're using this app that will show you who's read that day and who is not. And so if you've read that day, you put a check. And if you haven't read that day, it'll show no check by your name. And so it's a really big accountability that shows that, hey, Johnny has not read today. Everybody else has. And so it's kind of like it's not competitive, but it keeps you accountable through this app. And so it's really good. And then like working out, like Claire and I have been working out every day, not every day, but like throughout the week as well. So staying consistent with that, not just like working out once a week, like staying consistent with our physical health and then mental health as well. Is Claire and I will walk Lucy and we'll ask each other questions, ask each other some like deep questions like, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing with anxiety? How are you doing mentally? How are you doing with your job and stress level? How are you doing right now? Like, is there anything that I can be doing for like to help you with your mental health? And so, we're 26 days into January, but that's what our goal is to stay consistent. So that's my answer is consistent.
Yeah, if I had to give a word to kind of sum up our, this year or this phase chapter of life I'm in, I would say grateful. There is just coming out of the season I was in, there's just so much that I am extremely thankful for. Like, I think I mentioned on the last episode, but like, I'm so thankful for the job I have now. I'm so thankful for where Haley and I are in our relationship and how we've grown. I'm so thankful that I've reprioritized being intentional with friendships and that we have this podcast, Johnny, and it's strengthened our friendship. There's just so many things that I've had the best start to any year so far in 2025 that I think I've ever had, just as far as like being healthy, putting in new habits that are good for me, that are sharpening me and making me a better man. There's so much that I have to be grateful for. And I feel like something that Haley and I both have been learning in this phase or chapter in our life is just to let go of control I think, you get married and you think like, all right, we have a timeline. We'd love to buy a house. And, then after that, we can start a family and, we want to be settled into our jobs. And, here I am, I'm on my third job already. And, we were renting a small townhome at first, and now we're living with my mother-in-law because she was kind enough to let us do that so we can save up to buy a house just because of the housing market the way it is, which is, a humbling thing. And I'm also very grateful for that. But we just kind of had to let go of like feeling this pressure to be in all these places that we thought we needed to be. And so just kind of like letting go over control over our timeline that we had planned and dreamed up. And a theme verse for me this year it's from Proverbs 16, verse 9. It says, man makes his plans, but the Lord orders his steps. And, I think that's true of Haley and I's. We had all these plans, but the Lord has been faithful to order our steps, and we're just thankful for where he has us right now. And it's just cool to see how far we've come in that area.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. And I recommend listeners, like, that's a great question that we got from one of our listeners. And I recommend you thinking about that because it will reflect on how you are or where you want to be. So find your word of the year or phase.
Yeah. So next question is, does our current world allow us to be the husbands and fathers that our grandfathers and fathers were? Is it harder or easier? What do you think, Johnny?
I think this goes back to like the forgiveness one. This is not just for like, I think this is different for each person. I think for someone who may not have grew up with a good dad and maybe emotional abuse or physical abuse, or maybe your dad just like was there but wasn't present, I think this world actually is a good thing that this world is different so that we can be a different person. So like if you grew up where you didn't say I love you, or you weren't allowed to express your emotions, or you didn't feel like you could, this world now is a world where like it encourages that. And so I think that's a good thing. And so that's where on my take is that if you grew up with a negative one, now I grew up with a good dad, as Tucker as well. And to counter what I just said is this world does throw out a lot of more temptations that were not as easy to access when they grew up. And so it can be more difficult. However, like I said earlier, this world does, I think, is trying to encourage more vulnerability and more emotions so where you can express that with somebody. And so I think that one can help you and one cannot. But again, I think that just determines on how you grew up and what kind of dad. Are you trying to be like your dad, or are you trying to be different than your dad? I think that's what determines on what the question would be. That makes sense, Tucker?
Yeah. I think the way I would answer it is every generation has an opportunity to be better than the previous one at a lot of things, but specifically we're talking about parenting and being grandparents and all that. And so it's like the legacy you leave. And I just truly believe that each generation has the opportunity to be better, especially if you had a negative, not good experience with your earthly dad or earthly grandfather. You have the chance to break those generational chains and to heal and be someone better, to right the ship in a sense. But even if you had a good example and good father male figures in your life, you still have an opportunity to build on that foundation and be an even better father, an even better husband, even better granddad, like the opportunity's there. But to your point, there's all sorts of unique temptations and pulls in each generation that seek to pull men away from that opportunity and to go in the opposite direction. And that's, the guys that take that bait end up becoming the ones who have, create negative father figures and negative father experiences for the next generation. So every generation has the opportunity to build off of a strong foundation or to build a new foundation if there was a negative figure in its place.
Yeah, but like ultimately it's your decision that you make.
Mm-hmm.
And just go be a dog and go be there for your dogs.
Yeah, and you'll do all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next question is, when was the last time you told someone you were struggling, and how did they respond? I think the most recent last time, I think, was me talking to you, Johnny.
Yeah.
And it was related to like just trying to get better going into this year. So I think it was maybe this is a dumb answer, but like, I was struggling with being on social media too much. It was making me not present with Haley, not, mindful of my time with her. It was affecting me listening to her. And it was not good for me at work either, because I kept getting so distracted. And so, I went to you and I just said, hey, would you be willing to help me? And I mean, you were so quick to be like, yeah, man, absolutely. And then we came up with a game plan and did it. So I appreciate that, Johnny.
Yeah. No, I have more to say on the next next question. But yeah, no, I think I've asked like with you, like, hey man, I'm struggling with this. And even with my small group, and both you and my small group both did not be like, I can't believe you're struggling with that. Like, how dare you do that? You were like, okay, cool, let's fix this. Like, all right, like let me help you, and because it takes a lot of courage to tell someone you're struggling, and to have someone just be like, okay, awesome. Like, I will help you out. It's a really good impact. And I don't know if you have more to say on this, because I kind of want to carry on to the next question.
Yeah,
With
go
this
for it.
is this next question is really good, because this question is kind of like a part 2 one. It says, was one lesson you've learned about vulnerability that's completely changed how you've approached relationships? Because I've had a bad experience with this. Now, I'm not going to give names to this, because I don't want to call anything out. But I was a part of a group one time, and it was actually, I mean, like, it was the college that I went to, and they had small groups there, and with the small groups that they created, the RA was the head of the small group, and they would say, okay, you know what, guys, if you're struggling with anything, let me know. I'm here to help you out. Then they would go and they would confess. And so then guys would be like, okay, yeah, you know what? Thanks for allowing me to have this time. Let me share this with you. Well, then that RA would go, okay, thanks for sharing. Now I have to go tell the dean of school about this. I went to a Christian college. And so they went and told the dean of school about this. And then that guy would be put on probation. That is so dumb, like, and so I saw that, and I was like, this is teaching guys to be silent. This is not teaching guys to be vulnerable. It's teaching guys to be silent. If you get onto somebody when they share something and punish them for that, not how you do it. Okay. Now, I'm not saying, now, on the other side is I have been vulnerable with guys and they made it sound like it was okay that I was struggling with that. That's also like another thing, is I was part of a church and they were like, you know what, like, it's like, you know what, that's okay, man. And I was like, no, it's not okay. Like, I shouldn't be doing this. And so I've had both extremes with this. I've had guys who've punished people, and then I've had guys who almost encouraged it. And so, to a listener, when someone's vulnerable to you, like, how you respond is critical, because you're either going to teach them to be silent, encourage them to do more, or help them succeed. There's only those 3 options. And so please, when someone's vulnerable to you, just thank them first for being vulnerable. That's what I learned. I learned to thank the person, because that took a lot of courage. And then say, all right, let's get through this. Don't be like, you know what, everybody does it. That's totally okay. I'm like, if you do it again, like, I'm not saying my words are getting confusing right now. I'm not saying, like, yes, obviously they'll probably will fall again, but don't encourage them to make it seem like they can keep on doing this over and over and over again. Tucker, I need you to translate for me.
No, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's positive, there's all kinds of positive and negative experiences that either encourage vulnerability or keep people from being vulnerable. The most game-changing lesson for me actually came from scripture. In James 5, James says, speaking to the church, he says, pray for one another and confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. And in my own life, I went through experiences where I found that statement to be more true than I ever imagined it was. It wasn't until I started being vulnerable and honest with the people closest to me that I trusted the most that I started to actually heal from what I was going through. And I believe that to be true. Now, the situation you were talking about, Johnny, they are not creating an environment for healing to take place because they're actually punishing for vulnerability, which is really frustrating. But I loved how you told me that story, and you said you then would tell guys like,
Oh yeah.
hey, come to this other group.
Oh yeah.
You can talk here.
Yeah,
We're not going to turn you in.
Yeah, I made a side small group that I told them not to share with the RA because I didn't want them to start getting onto us. But yeah, I made a whole new small group, and I was like, listen, guys, if you need to share something, let me know. And I was like, I will keep it between you and I, and I will help, and we will work together to help each other be more like Christ. And I'm not going to go tell on you for that. So yeah, that got me so that was such a bad time.
Yeah. Well, and it's so unfortunate because that kind of thing happens more often than it should. Like, I know of another guy who is in ministry like myself, and he shared something vulnerable, like a struggle of his, about his life in his ministry context, and ended up, through a series of events, they fired him because he shared that with people. And I don't want to go into all the details, but that just can't be how the church is meant to function.
That is how
or society is meant to function.
You teach people to be quiet is what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, because in that situation, he wasn't saying it was a current struggle of his. He was talking about it being a struggle in the past, and they still treated him that way. And I was just like, what are we doing? How do you expect other people to heal from his story and him? Because that's the other thing, is you being vulnerable not only helps you heal, but it can also help others heal.
Yeah.
Especially if it's practiced in community. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good question. And yeah, I appreciate you bringing in those examples, because too often there's negative examples of stuffing down vulnerability and almost punishing people for being vulnerable.
Yeah, you don't have to say really anything when someone's vulnerable. You can just sit there with them.
Just listen.
Yeah,
try
just
and
listen
and ask good questions.
Don't try to compare. Just be like, dude, all right, thank you for every time someone's vulnerable with you, every time, no matter what the situation is, always thank them. Always thank them. And then you can say, all right, hey, if you want me to be your accountability partner, let's talk about these steps. Let's talk about how to move forward, and yeah, we should do a podcast on that one, an episode.
Yeah, that would be good.
But we're not. We're doing all questions. So the next question that we have is, how do you personally balance the pressure to be strong with the need to take care of your mental health? And dude, that is the almost mission statement of our podcast, is that question right there. That's kind of the whole reason why we started, was because we had this balance that we realized that we needed to share, that you can't have this balance, because people thought that you either get either or option. You can either focus on your mental health, or you can be strong, but you can't do both. Right? And I mean, that's kind of the reason why we started this. One of the many reasons why we started this podcast.
Yeah. And I'll just point back to the episode with your dad and so many other guests that we've had on. They were strong. I mean, you and I saw, and you were telling me, but you saw it firsthand, what your dad was going through leading up to doing that podcast and sharing and being vulnerable.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt, it took an incredible amount of strength, courage, and bravery for him to share his story on our podcast.
Yeah.
So, and I think that goes for life. It's just hard to talk about in general. So when you talk about being strong as a man, being vulnerable and being honest is a way to be strong and to have courage and show bravery.
Yeah.
Because if you're not sharing it, it's because you think you're too worried about what other people are thinking about you. That's what I think.
And I'm not trying to be just, be offensive, but this is tough love. That's a weak-minded mentality.
Yeah.
Because if you think that you can't share, then that's weak. And you can get there, but being strong is sharing.
Yep. Next question. Have you ever felt that apologizing made you feel weaker or stronger, and why? And let me start off by saying I don't know, I know you listen to Nate Bargatze. Listeners, I don't know if you listen to Nate Bargatze.
You should, if you don't.
Yeah, he's a hilarious stand-up comedian, but there's a bit he has where he's talking about how marriage has just like gotten him real used to apologizing. He's like, it'd be real nice to hear the words "I'm sorry" come out of her mouth every now and then. He's like, I walk around the house with a sack of sorries, just passing them out. Here you go. Here's one. Here's one. And so I say that to intro in to where if you feel weak apologizing, get married, brother. You'll get real used to it real fast. And what comes with it, and I'm not saying that just because it's not like I'm apologizing all the time in my marriage. It's not like we're, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But what I will say is marriage helps you grow in humility. It kills your pride. It shows you how selfish you are. And humility is what unlocks your ability to apologize and view it as a strength, because you realize that the world's not about you and not everything revolves around you. And so it's okay to admit that you messed up and to apologize. So it's rooted in humility. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I think it comes with going with marriage, is there sometimes when Claire and I are saying something and I'll say something and it offends her. And she goes, well, you said that, but what I heard was this. And I was like, but that's not what I said. But if I heard her feelings are validated. And so I should swallow my pride of that, like you were saying, and say, listen, okay, I'm so sorry. I did not mean for that to come across this way. So here's where I was coming from, but I apologize if that hurt your feelings. And I think apologizing strengthens love with people. So it doesn't make you a weaker person. It makes you strengthen the love with somebody in that way.
Absolutely. All right. Up next, can you describe a moment when being emotionally open with a friend strengthened your bond?
We don't have enough time.
Yeah, I have so many moments.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a specific one. Do you have one off the top of your head?
No, I was just thinking, there's so many that, I think every friendship that I've had that's super deep has started off with that. And where I think of one being in college where I had, because I'm going back to that whole thing with when they were told if they share something that they're going to get in trouble. The friends in that small group that I created, we became really tight, and we were really close with one another, and we share things with one another, and we knew that the person I'm sharing with wasn't going to tell anybody, go snitch on me, but he was meant to hold me to a higher standard. And so that moment right there, those friend groups that I have, we still have a group chat, and I haven't seen those guys in a year or two, maybe 3, but we still text every week and we still talk. And if someone says, hey, can you pray for me? We still do that. We've seen each other a long time. We all live in different areas now, but that made us very close and very strong.
Yeah, I think for me, I was able to think of a specific time that we had, and this goes back to the previous 2 questions too. It just reinforced all the things that I had learned about vulnerability and honesty. But just creating a space for that in your friendships, I think was something that I had to grow in. And I remember we were doing a guys' weekend, and it was just me and one of my other buddies driving down together. And so we had, over 3 hours just to talk and catch up. And, eventually, and at this time, that specific friend had experienced just a devastating, tragic loss. in his family. And normally I feel like us as guys would be like, I'm not going to ask about it because I don't want to bring things up. But I decided to just be like, hey man, how are you doing? And I think he had mentioned something about it. And so I felt comfortable bringing it up. I didn't just bring it up out of nowhere. And gosh, man, we just had such a good, honest, raw conversation. I learned so much from it, and I'm pretty sure. I mean, he wrote me a note recently, just thanking me for allowing two friends to be vulnerable, and so he still really values that conversation we had that day. But that would be what I would say. It's just what was good for me is rethinking how do you even create those spaces in your friendships to have those deeper conversations. Road trips apparently are a great way to do it.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I would actually like to, maybe we should like unpack this more and talk about this, because I'd be like a lot more vulnerable. But yeah, I mean, just do that, because you have no idea. You being vulnerable is going to allow someone else to be vulnerable as well.
Mm-hmm.
The next question, and I kind of want to ask this to you because it's kind of currently something that you're going through. Is what role has therapy or self-reflection played in improving your closest relationships?
Oh man, it is so valuable. I mean, it just, again, we're bringing it up for a third time, I think, but we all have blind spots, and therapy can be so helpful because even sometimes your own spouse or partner or yourself just can't see the things that are preventing you from taking that next step towards improvement and towards getting better. And so, seeing a couples counselor for Haley and I, we learned so much from it. And, you set goals and you talk about why you started it. And we actually feel like to the point now where we're like, we learned enough to where we can actually scale it back. So we were meeting with her every week. Now we're going to do once a month. And so there's signs of growth. Like we actually are improving in our communication, improving in just how we love each other. And so, yeah, it is incredibly valuable for self-reflection, because that's what the counselor's job is to ask questions that make you reflect inward on yourself, and then also give practical advice on how you can improve in those areas.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. And you and I've talked about it a lot, and I've been like, I've learned things by listening to things that you've learned. And so it helps more than just you, for sure. So it is like, keep going, is this next question is, how do you personally approach asking for help without feeling like a burden to others? And I don't know about you, but like, this made me immediately think of Iola when he came on here,
Mm,
and he was talking about feeling like a burden to other people. And he said, when other people come to me with stuff, it doesn't feel like a burden to me. So why do I think that when I tell other people stuff? And that like was a really good quote for me, because I was like, you're so right. Because when people tell me stuff, I don't treat that as a burden. But when
mm-hmm.
I tell someone, I think that I'm burdening them. So I think that's the whole thing of we think so much in our head, and we got to realize that people aren't thinking that same thing. And so for me personally, that's how I view it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I'm pretty sure. So Dan mentioned the book "How to Win Friends and Influence People" by Dale Carnegie when he came on. I'm pretty sure it's in that book where he talks about how everyone, first and foremost, spends most of their time thinking and caring about numero uno, me, myself, and I,
Right.
right? And so you going and asking them for help strokes their ego and strokes their pride. And so they're going to be more than willing to help you out, because it plays on that, just the way we're wired as human beings, to be selfish and to be prideful. Like, asking someone for help is, then you're pretty much saying, hey, you have information and you look successful. I would love to learn from you. That's pretty much what you're communicating. So yeah, it's not a burden to ask someone for help. If anything, you're helping that person by asking them for help, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. No, that's a great way to think about it too.
Yeah. Okay, next question. is about money.
We have not.
Show me the
We have
money.
not talked about money at all on this podcast.
I know. So it says, how does money affect your mental health? And do you have any personal stories about financial successes or failure and how it impacted your life?
Yeah. Yes. This was for me this summer. It was like right before we started this podcast. I was stressed out a lot because teachers, everyone says, "Oh, it must be nice to be a teacher," which never say that. Just let's say that, and they say because you get summer off. Well, we don't get paid in the summertime. Let's just be clear with that. And that was my first summer as a teacher. That was not on my radar. I was like, what am I going to do? Like right now, Claire was working, and I applied for jobs, but no one was going to hire me because I wasn't able to work for a long time. I had to be back at my teaching job in August. And Claire made a comment to me. So I was stressed out because of money, because we weren't having the normal income that we were having. And then as soon as my first paycheck came in of teaching, and let's be honest, I'm a teacher. It's not a lot. But she said, wow, isn't this funny how now that we have money coming back in from both of our jobs, your stress has decreased? And I was like, I hate how much you make me better. and yeah, I mean, but she wasn't wrong. Like I was so stressed and I was an unpleasant person to be around. And then as soon as that issue of money went away, I was fine and I was good. And she called me out and she was like, you need to give that to the Lord, because this obviously was what was holding you and making you like that. And so, yeah, I am not fully, I've not fully changed from that. I'm still learning, but I think about that conversation that we had, because that is a really good reminder for me to be like, all right, I don't need to let this captivate me, or I don't need to let this control me, because it does, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't want to add too much onto it because I did mention a little bit earlier, but like Haley and I had all these plans, things we were working towards, goals we had set financially, and we just had to learn. It did contribute to anxiety or feelings of like inadequacy, almost like that we're doing something wrong or, whatever. And just the Lord and His grace brought us to this place where He's like, guys, just let go of this control you have over your timeline and just trust me. It'll happen in its own timing. The Lord, Matthew 6:33 says, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So we can trust God for His provision, and it may not look like what we think it's going to look like, but He will always provide. And so, and we're still learning and growing. And now I'm not going to act like we've arrived and like, we fully trust God with our finances and we're not, stressed. Or there's times where I'm like, man, I really want us to have our own place and be in a house. But I'm in a season where I just got to wait and trust the Lord. And, not that living with, my mother-in-law hasn't been awesome. She's great and we get along fantastic, but there's just certain perks to having your own space that we've gone without for a little bit. But we know that it's a temporary sacrifice that's going to set us up well for what God has for us in the future. So,
well, going back to that verse in the beginning, like in chapter 6, he talks about, look at the birds in the air. Do I not take care of them? How much more valuable are you? And so here's a practical thing when it comes to money. When you're stressed about money, go outside and listen to the birds. And let that be a reminder to you that God's going to take care of you just as much as He takes care of those birds. He'll take care of you way more than that as well.
That was actually a very healing moment for me. And I think it was during my first, we were at the cabin together and I couldn't sleep well. And so I'd gotten up fairly early and just wrapped myself up in a blanket, went out on the porch with a cup of coffee, and I'd read that passage. And like, as I was reading, I heard the birds singing. And I just remember this moment of the Lord being like, you're really stressed out about your job and you're anxious about the future, but I take care of these birds. How much more will I take care of you? It was an awesome moment.
Again, easier said than done. but
Yep.
a good reminder to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, next question is one I'm very excited to talk about. Not that I haven't been excited to talk about all these because they've all been great. This one says contributing. What are the contributing factors to male loneliness epidemic, and how can we combat them? So, contributing factors. I'm going to give two. I hate using COVID as an excuse for things.
So funny. That was my thing too.
However, I do think that seriously is a huge factor.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look, I was reading a book called Made for Friendship, and he said this quote, and I do think this is how most people think and operate in today's world since COVID is they wake up, they go to work, they come home and watch TV until they fall asleep, and then they wake up the next day and do the exact same thing all over again. Sadly, that is the reality for so many people. And I think it's because COVID, that was all we could do. And so it kind of got conditioned into us, and we lost a lot of that social aspect. And so I would say that, but I would also say our phones and social media create this false sense of community that isn't actually community. Like, it convinces us that we're connected with people and that we know what's going on in people's lives. It's called social media, so it gives this facade that you are being social by engaging on these platforms and apps, and you can to a certain extent, but there's a line. And to have deep, authentic, true friendship, it can't happen over a screen. You got to have intentional time together that you're talking, catching up, and that, that can happen through phone calls, it can happen through FaceTime, so you can use technology to perpetuate that. But just keeping up with what your friend's doing through what they post on social media is not keeping up with a deep, authentic friendship.
Yeah. And I would say that, yeah, COVID for sure has taught us to like isolate ourselves. And yeah, you're right, where we can just be our own thing. And I will say with that is also this sense of being independent as well, is that we think, I just need to leave the nest, like I need to leave the nest and be independent. Well, yeah, you're right. Like if you're referring to a bird does leave the nest, but then if you look at birds, they always fly together. And so, yes, you can leave the nest, and then once you are mature enough to leave the nest, fly with others as well. And don't think you can do this by yourself. And I think you think if you're doing this with other people that you're not independent, you're not, and you're not as this mature person as you want to. But if you're referring to birds, leave the nest. Birds fly together, so fly with others. Be there with people as well, because you're going to need them. If you're a single guy, and I mean, it's a hot take. I try to have a roommate. I think having a roommate would be good. If you don't want to have a roommate, have a consistent hangout time with somebody. Have a consistent someone coming in with there and being there and doing life with you as well. That's just like another 2 cents as well. And if you know someone who is intentionally pushing you away, sometimes you gotta make things uncomfortable and just be like, all right, I've been trying to hang out, you haven't, I'm coming over. Just like do that and be intentional. Don't worry about their feelings of so much more that you care more about them. They may be mad at you, but you care more about them, and you know that this is like the best for them.
Yeah, and I think the next question kind of ties into the end of the first question, like how do we combat male loneliness? The next question was, what are some ideas for dudes hanging out / finding friends? So like, how do we combat male loneliness? Well, we got to give some ways for guys to connect, to make friends. A few that come to the top of my mind: always be an advocate of church being a place to find good friends. But I will say a lot of churches don't really invest or prioritize their men's ministry and like creating spaces for guys to connect. So find a church that does. B, I would say sports is an awesome way to connect with guys, whether it's, going to football games and tailgates, meeting people, going to, somewhere out to watch a game and meeting other people who share your same team allegiance, or you just see a guy out in public who's wearing a Tennessee shirt and you say go Vols and it strikes up a conversation. Or like adult sports rec leagues, like go join a men's softball team or like a men's pickleball league, or go play some, pickup basketball with some guys. Those are great ways for guys to connect. Along with that, I mean, you could have, so one thing I came across from a friend at my church, actually, that he helped Johnny and I realize is that men typically think in one of 4 categories. So you got work, relationships, hobbies, and health, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever. If you can try and think of things in one of those 4 buckets, odds are those are a great place to connect with guys. So join like a business networking group if you're trying to, meet people in your field, your industry. Join a leadership group if you just want to improve those skills, or like a book club that's, going through a leadership book. Relationships, I mean, there's got to be something out there.
I was thinking also like a lot of breweries in the city, they do these like run clubs to where you go and you run. I mean, they have a ton of people. You go and run with them, and then at the end you go to a brewery, and it's like this whole thing where everyone's talking to everyone. You're talking while you're running and at the brewery, and so that's a one really cool thing to meet people, because it is hard when you get to this age. It's like when you're like out of college to meet new friends, and so like do stuff like that. CrossFit. I would never do CrossFit. I'm not gonna say never. I would like to do one class, but people with CrossFit, I know people who do CrossFit, and the one thing that people say with CrossFit is they always talk about the community. I've never heard one person talk bad about the community in CrossFit, and so that could be one like do like maybe a workout thing with somebody where you're doing a life together, just doing something hard together will help you out. And also, I want to add is if you're a guy and you want to hang out and you can't find anybody, reach out to Tucker and I. Tucker and I would love more than anything to be a part of your community and include you into our community. And so that's one way you can do it, is if you need someone and you need community, we're your guys.
Yeah. And just find a hobby.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be a sport. It doesn't have to be golf. It could be you want to learn how to play an instrument, and then you just find other people who play an instrument and you start hanging out with them. It could be that you want to, there's endless options when it comes to hobbies.
Which
so
I like that this is kind of our last question, because I do want to segue into, I know like if you stuck with us for this long, like I appreciate this. I appreciate everyone sending in questions. I would love the feedback if you want to do this again. But this is our quote unquote off season of college football, right? And so we're not going to be talking about college football games anymore. And I'm not going to give too much away. I kind of want to tease this a little bit, but where Tucker and I have been meeting and talking about is, I think in this quote unquote off season, we're going to start having meetups with guys. We wanted to make the For My Dawg podcast be more than just words, but also be actions as well. And so please stay tuned for what that's going to be like. We'll post more about this, but we're going to give you a chance. If you need community or you want to have more community, we're going to provide the opportunity for you. And we're going to start having these in-person meetups with our For My Dawgs family.
Yeah. And so for this, we're going to cut how much we're posting back. So we're only going to do every other week instead of weekly. And that'll give us more time to plan and make these meetups and events more worthwhile for you guys. And so, but with this, we don't want to we want it to be an intentional community. And so our commitment is we're going to create a Discord group so that all of us can jump in, join that. That's our way to connect with one another, to talk. That's where all the details of these meetups and hangouts will be. And so it'll be a link to join will be in the description of this video. So go join that, make that the first thing you do after you finish this podcast, because you don't want to miss out on the opportunities we're going to have coming up throughout early 2025 on into the summer. And trust me, there's some good stuff on the horizon. We met to start the planning process last week. So be on the lookout for that. Join our community, the For My Dawgs family, on Discord. Maybe we'll have a cooler name for it. We'll have to figure that out. But please do that so you can get all the details. And without further ado, that is the end of our mailbag episode. Johnny, I enjoyed this thoroughly. They asked great questions.
Really
and
good.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much. Your questions and the conversations that flowed out of it will impact someone's life. I believe that. And so thank you guys so much from the bottom of our hearts. As always, if you've listened this long, you're still here. You obviously enjoy the content. It brings value to you. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, follow on your way out so that this podcast can grow and reach more and more men, and so that we can grow that For My Dawgs family and that community so that more men can experience healing through vulnerability, honesty, and just having a blast, having fun together. So please do that on your way out. As always, go be a dog today.
And go be there for your dogs.